discussion. I know that more people are slowly coming down from the break, but we thought that we would nonetheless begin. Let me begin by just briefly introducing our speakers for the panel, and then just mentioning a bit what the format of what we're going to do here. So the panel is on the topic of exploring space and time today, so very much apropos this conference. And our first speaker is Kelly Forbes, who is Executive Director of the Al Asia Pacific Institute. And then that will be followed by Professor Alberto Kaanan, who is from the faculty. That was the experimental music part of the session. Who is the Professor of Philosophy and Letters at the Autonomous University in Puebla in Mexico. And then our third contributor to this panel is Christopher Cordova, who is the co-founder and CEO of Victoria Ecosystems.
Oh, we're going to get new microphones.
Yeah. Technical.
La alternativa.
So, as you can see, the problem of getting to space is going to be easier compared to getting our mics in order. So, without further ado, the idea of the panel is to have our three contributors sort of present their ideas about exploring space and time today from their particular areas of expertise, and then time permitting to see if we can have a discussion, a set of questions, also including you in the audience. And a bit like earlier this afternoon, time is always the issue, so if you want to contribute or ask a question and we're not able to do so because of time consideration, then please don't hesitate afterwards. Part of what a conference is about is not only what happens on the stage, but what happens off the stage. So if we don't have time enough to get your comments and remarks, then please don't hesitate. I'm sure that our three panelists would be more than happy to continue the conversation with you then afterwards. So with that, then with no further ado, let me please welcome and introduce Kelly to be our first contributor to this panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicholas, and thank you. Special thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to be here today, contributing to this conference. So, I want you to come with me to an university room. Is this working? I want you to come with me to an university room in Brazil. It's 2002, and it's my first day at law school. And as I sit in this dark room of an old building, I'm filled with excitement, imagining where this journey would take me. And as I stand here today, having had a few years past, and having lived and worked in 5 countries, and having seen how technology has evolved to transform our lives, one thing remains, and that is my belief that we can only bring a positive impact in humanity through the combination of cooperation and justice. So can I ask you all to close your eyes for a moment, please? And I would like you to imagine what 2050 will look like. And I can see some people not closing their eyes. And maybe the first images coming to your mind right now are pictures of robots walking around and flying cars. You can all open your eyes now. And I find this future exciting and full of opportunities. But I also spend much of my time thinking about the implications and how this technology is impacting our humanity and how well we are designing this future. And the most important thing is we cannot imagine 2050 without thinking about artificial intelligence. And so in the next 20 minutes or so, I will share with you why I believe artificial intelligence holds the largest potential to transform humanity, help us to unleash our potential. But before doing so, I will also share with you some implications that we must overcome to get there, and the role that philosophy as well as other disciplines have in accomplishing this. And so as a disclaimer, before we look at these scenarios, it's really not fully possible to predict the future, despite many attempts. We cannot really, AI could create very different kinds of society. But the scenarios I'm going to share with you are likely given the pace in developments and the current landscape that we see. So if we think about work, how does work look like in 2050? We have artificial intelligence and robots will be automating much of what we do. Tasks such as administrative tasks, reimagining, designing, everything would be automated by AI. And as AI takes over many aspects of our work and what we do, the question that becomes very important is how well are we addressing the challenges that will bring into our humanity? So we currently have around the world a lot of debate about whether universal income would be the solution to address the job disruption. And what that means is that governments around the world will be making sure that the population will receive a basic income, and that, you know, even if your job is under job disruption, you will be looked after. But even if that component is addressed, we still have other ethical and social implications. In a society where we are used to working from 9 to 5, and we have learned to define our humanity in the work that we do and place our self-worth there, artificial intelligence will give us back our most valuable resource, and that is time. But what we will do with it, and how is that going to actually improve our lives, it's something that we still need to think about. And then next, let's think about the healthcare. What does our healthcare look like in 2050? And so we know we're moving into a space of predictive medicine. Genome, artificial intelligence, and other emerging technologies are transforming our healthcare. And we're now able to predict diseases and find treatments and individualized in a much faster way that has ever been possible. And with that, we also have new questions. If we have artificial intelligence and technologies solving most of our diseases, curing rare diseases, and helping us to live longer, better, potentially even avoiding death in itself, as we currently have technologists and companies around the world studying how do we make sure that, you know, we humanity can live forever. We'll have new questions then. Are we as a humanity really designed to be immortal? And then finally, we look at our education system, and we think about how technology has evolved and the role that teachers are playing are being reduced. We now have technologies that can educate our children, and we can think about that in 2050 in a world where we can have our children learning science from Albert Einstein, or potentially learning arts from Pablo Picasso. And then we also think about the growing impact that is already having on the discussions around privacy and the impact of psychological issues that those technologies can have in schools. And what are the measures and things that we need to put in place to make sure that the technology is really working to flourish children's full potential. And then finally, we have the metaverse. So the metaverse will give us a whole new world, and where all these different sectors will be expanded, and we can't really quite predict what the challenges or implications will be in that sense. The blur in our online and offline world will become less relevant with the introduction of the metaverse. In 2050, potentially, you won't be able to tell the difference between a real person and an AI-driven avatar. An AI-driven avatar may be as ambiguous as the cell phone is today. And so there you also find new implications and challenges that we haven't really predicted before. This is something that we have seen in the history of the internet. The internet has transformed our lives in incredible ways, and we work and we learn in ways that were not previously predicted. And there we also found challenges that we did not previously predicted, challenges around darkness, cybersecurity, and others. So in a similar way, I see the journey towards AI taking us into this new route where we'll find flourishment, we'll find opportunities, and we'll find new ways of living. And there we'll also find potential new opportunities that we haven't necessarily predicted. And so, all of the above circumstances involve very complex questions that we need to untangle. And luckily, we have a discipline that has been around for over 2 millennia that is very familiar with dealing with complicated and complex questions, and that is philosophy. Philosophy can help us in guiding us with the ethical way of thinking about these issues. And so, if I can share with you this image, as soon as we can have that. Here we go. So, philosophy is used to answering the hard questions. This is a very philosophical problem that has been around for quite a while. Most of you probably familiar. This is called the trolley problem. You have a train and you have to make a decision. Do we go straight or do we diverge so that we don't kill as many people? And these types of questions are now more relevant than ever, because with the self-driving cars, who will make that decision for the car, and how we are going to decide that? So philosophy can have a role in guiding us in these types of ethical decisions. But for this and for all these other implications, we need more. We need cooperation. And then I go back to my belief that we can only really bring a positive impact through the combination of cooperation and justice. And so cooperation, because we need the philosophers to work with the technologists. You cannot have the technologists building this future alone. Cooperation because artificial intelligence and these implications, this future that we are designing, are not really impacting one corner of the world. This is an issue for the international community as a whole. Cooperation because we need a multidisciplinary approach to answer these questions. And then finally, justice, because that is the foundation for building a fair world. And now we have the opportunity to do that with technology. So let me, considering all these implications that I have been sharing with you, you might be thinking, why do we need artificial intelligence in the first place? Why should we bring technology if we have all these implications and if it's making things more complicated than it needs to be? And the answer to that is time. Because we only have 80 years left to meet the UN Sustainable Goals. And what that means is that in 2015, the UN put forward 17 sustainable goals. These are a call for action on things like food distribution, water, energy, very, very critical issues. We were supposed to meet that by 2030. We have 80 years. And so with the clock ticking, the question remains how we will get there. We have seen progress, but we have not seen as fast as we need to see. And if most of us in this room will probably agree that climate change is not an option, it's not a nice to have. It's an emergency to our humanity. And it links to many of these questions that we're debating here in this conference. And so the question is, how do we get there? This is where artificial intelligence comes in. Artificial intelligence holds the largest potential to advance each one of these goals. It goes direct to the ability of processing large amounts of data and power to accelerate impact. Not only artificial intelligence, we have other technologies that work with that. In energy, for example, if we look at the future of power, we are moving from a predominantly fuel-based power, where we have oil and gas, to a technology-based power, where we have battery power sharing. And artificial intelligence has a critical role to play in this shift. About 3 years ago, I was in a conference in Asia in artificial intelligence, and the conversation there was around many of the implications, bias, and other issues relating to that. And I found myself having a conversation with one of the technologists at the end of it. And he shared with me how he has working for over 10 years, building solutions that can be later deployed by banks and other large financial institutions. And he said that seeing bias and these implications are daily part of his work. And then his next words really impacted me. And he said, and that is just the way the world is. And artificial intelligence is simply amplifying that. I deeply choose to disagree with that statement. I believe that artificial intelligence is here as an opportunity for us to create a better world. The opportunity is now. We don't have to wait 80 years for that. And let me share an example with you why I believe that is the case. Research demonstrates, for example, that judges might not always be transparent about their decisions in court. More often than not, these decisions can be linked to financial status, to racial, to other conditions linked to the person's behavior, language, and so on. Could artificial intelligence have a role to bring fair judgments in court? So one of the ways of making that shift is by bringing predictive data. And you do that with artificial intelligence because it can uncover things that the brain cannot. It can process data that the brain cannot. Research also shows that judges, when given enough information and time, can address these biases by making the right decision. So in that sense, and if artificial intelligence could be efficiently deployed in court, we could essentially be using it to advance justice. And that is very much a typical scenario where you see technology working harmoniously alongside humanity. Not to take away the judge's job, but to accelerate and helping, guiding him to make the right decisions. So in 2050, we will ultimately not be judged by our technology, but we will certainly be judged by the future that we have designed. And we have an opportunity now to design the future with this new technology. Artificial intelligence is here reminding us of our humanity and as an opportunity that we can and should design a better world. And as for our humanity, we are unique, we are irreplaceable. Thank you.
So thank you, Kelly, for these remarks on the future, 2050, artificial intelligence. And the next set of remarks, our speaker is Professor Alberto Kaanan.
Well, my problem is why in the West there is a kind of growing perturbance politically. There is a very big radicalization. We have only to look at the presidential election in the USA in the last terms in order to recognize that. And on the other side, there are places, traditional ones, who are much more calm, much more under the rule of law, some kind of law. And the hypothesis is that has to do with the technology, with a clash in the West between the technology for reaching social agreement, that is democracy, parliamentary democracy, representation on this side, and the other side, the electrical, digital technology. Those things are completely different structures. Democracy comes from what we can say mechanical technology. For instance, typography or the assembly line. What is the dominant structure in this case? That everything has its place and its time. Things doesn't happen simultaneously, doesn't happen immediately, but they happen piece by piece and sequentially. So functions democracy. For example, there are a lot of institutions with its venues, with its procedures, with its protocols, with its jurisdictions, the legislative power, the executive power, the legal power, and these institutions had the time or need time in order to function. For example, if there is a trial, a commercial trial, or a family trial that has steps, you have to follow these steps each by one. Like in the assembly line, or like when you write, you have to take word by word and letter by letter to put them in sequence. Each letter has its place. You can't alter this. And this kind of function extends, embraces the whole society, or has embraced the whole society in the West. There are institutions special for wealth, for health, for education, for administration, and these institutions have the same form in industry. Industry functions in the same way, the mechanical industry. Well, that is very brief, very fast said. That is the kind of mechanical structuring of society as a whole. But what happens when we come to the electricity? The electricity is not fixed at some point, like the river like the coast, like the wind. Electricity, as far as we have the distribution of electricity, is available for everywhere, in the executive suite or in the farm. So electricity is delocalized. And for the people who are urbanites, that is much clearer. So the electricity has no place in order to be used. But the law, the military, the industry had places and is attached to schedules, as I said. A trial has a lot of moments. Each part of the trial comes in its time, when you can compress that. So this kind of fragmentation of answeration is the structure of the old way of life in the Western countries. But what happened when electricity comes? The first thing is this delocalization in the use of electricity. The second, or the additional point, is that electricity eliminates distance. The effects of electricity are instantaneously. Electricity works at the speed of light. You don't have to wait for the effect of electricity. You have only to turn the switch off, and electricity is already there. So space as distance is eliminated, quite eliminated by the electricity. What kind of space gives us besides that? Locality. Things have its locality. But what happens when electricity makes a global interconnection? The effects of the interconnection mean that whatever happens somewhere in the world is known everywhere. And if it can have consequences, for example, a crash, an economic crash in the shares of the companies, that is already there in an instant. So the interconnection, the speed of electricity annuls distance, and the quantitative dimension of space. And the interconnection, the global interconnection, eliminates other dimension of space, that is locality. That is, has no sense anymore, because you can act through electricity, especially in the case of the digital version of electricity, from everywhere. And when you are not tied to a schedule. You can text, you can send an email, you can navigate, you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, from wherever you want. Locality is not relevant anymore. And the third characteristic is that the decentralization and the connection of the people through electricity destroy traditional hierarchical structures, destroys authority. That is very well known from the case of telephone. In the companies, before the telephone, in the enterprises, there were places where the information was enclosed, and if you wanted to get to this information, you had to make a lot of steps in order to reach this information. But now, somebody, or since telephones, somebody pick up the telephone, and everybody knows everything. Now we have that with Twitter, with Facebook, with Instagram, and the leak of information is what makes impossible to have discussions private, to take time, to negotiate, to reach agreement. Before politicians do that, everybody knows everything, and there is a disturbance. And besides, in this situation, there is self-representation. Before, the people had needed a representative for doing something. There was intermediaries of general interest, but now, when we all are in the web 2.0, everybody is a broadcaster. Everybody can put content on the web, and nobody needs representation. Everybody represents itself. If you take all these elements, Susan, democracy can't function anymore. Why? There are no places, secret places or private places for agreement. Everything should happen immediately, and everything can happen from everywhere. And democracy can't bear this kind of situation. What is happening? That technology changed our psyche, the way in which we orient ourselves in the world, how we judge and how we behave in the world. And the mechanical form of technology generates a kind of psyche completely different of the electro-digital form of psyche, which is the kind of psyche that we have when we live online. Place is not important anymore. Distance is not important anymore. I can say whatever I want, whenever I want, from wherever I want, and I am very emotive because the pressure of real time pushes me, and I don't have time to reflect, to negotiate, to think careful about things. The tendencies, the hashtags in the web grow in a matter of minutes, of hours, and if you need negotiation, you need time. We have the instance of the yellow vest in France. The yellow vest didn't like unions, universities, churches, politicians. They wanted immediate solutions to his wishes, and they go over the whole mechanical institution of democracy in France, and they demanded to talk directly to President Macron, and they wanted immediate solutions. This kind of immediacy, of self-representation, of taking the problems in the own hands is linked to emotivity, to colère. The main word for the yellow vest was la colère, the angry, being furious. And the people in the net is always on the verge of becoming furious. And when you are furious, you can't negotiate anything. So this kind of psyche, when, according to which I demand immediate solutions, here and now, and total solutions, and not a part of solution, not piecemeal solutions, but the whole solution is in a structural clash, psychic, with the psyche of democracy. Democracy is calm, is tolerant, it means to make trade-off, to reflect, to put aside emotions in order to reach agreement. So in this kind of structural clash between the psyche of democracy and the psyche of the life online, there is no way out. The more we live in the West, the more we live online, the less important is space and time. We live in an eternal now, in eternal immediacy, placeless, and without representation, without the capacity of negotiate, and for this reason, the West is increasingly disturbed. The other possibility, which could be that there are traditional societies living according to rules that give these societies stability, and when we come to the electro-digital technologies, the people is constrained by the rules, and these kinds of rules are psychic resources that allow people to absorb digital technology without going crazy. What do I mean with going crazy? The correlate of mechanical technology is the individual, outside of the clan, outside of the family, outside of the tradition, outside of the inheritance, only abstract individuals. And these abstract individuals become highly subjectivistic. For example, everybody customizes everything. Everybody has his list of friends in Facebook. Everybody has his followers. Everybody has his echo chamber in the media, and his playlist in the media, music playlist, the playlist in Netflix or the like. So the individualization potentiates the differences, and there is no chance of becoming somehow interrelated in view of responsibilities, in view of agreements. And the other side would be the traditional societies where the people are not in this kind, individualistic, assume responsibilities, assume traditions, assume positions in the society, and this kind of old structure is a psychic resource that avoids that individual in contact with the digital world goes crazy. The individuals can be different, but they are bound by tradition, by the law, whichever this tradition is. Can be the uses and customs of the people, can be the religion, can be different kinds of structure that the people have many years before, and when the digital technology comes, there is already a structure that is not in crisis immediately because of the diversity fostered by electric technology. So summing up, there is the thesis I am researching about this is that we have two zones in the world, in a broad sense. The zone with the political institutions and industrial institutions of the West in a structural clash with the new technologies who had destroyed the space, who had destroyed the schedules. And other zone, traditional zone, where there is, for very long time ago, one structure where individualism is not present, at least in the degree in which it is present in the West. And when to this part of the world arrived the digital technology combines with this situation, and we have, that is my hypothesis, places like Singapore, like China, and other countries where the digital technology is absorbed and where the people can maintain much more stability and order than in the West. The complaint in the West is increasingly polarization, political polarization, is fragmentation in identities. There are a lot of identities, and each identity is, you cannot put it away. You have to take it, and there is no common discourse. There is no common story. There is no common frame anymore. And my guess is that the West has no chance. That is nothing. That is not a thing for tomorrow, but 20 years or 30 years of a little bit more, historically is nothing. The polarization in the West comes from around 2000, and it's much bigger with the social media from around 2010, 2015. In this way, I am wondering what is the possibility of traditional societies of build a new alternative to this disturbed West.
Thank you, Professor Alberto. And now our third speaker is Kристофер Cordova. You should use this mic.
Thank you very much. I really prefer this microphone. It's better for singing. So thank you all very much for being here. I'm Kристофер Cordova, and I'm speaking about the three things that humanity has to do in order for us to be ready to become a multi-planet species. And those three things happen to be here. They need to be solved here. We need to close the gap, the space between human and nature before we set up to conquer the outer space, the greater space. Okay, so first step. We need to seriously tackle solutions related to climate change, biodiversity loss, and food security. These are the first three challenges. So first step, we need to get serious about sustainability. We need to get serious about solutions towards climate change, biodiversity loss, and food security. First thing. Second step, we need data. We need to try and solve those three gigantic challenges, but we need to gather data on the process. Without data, we cannot prove what worked, what didn't work. We cannot know what happened. And we cannot predict, we cannot create models to have a look into the future, to try to have a look into the future, precisely with AI and with other tools, and trying to get to know how exactly we will be addressing future problems if we don't gather data. So we do need to collect data. And it's not only about collecting, we need to open it. All of us, all humans are entitled access to the data of the solutions that we are creating, financing, deploying towards climate change, biodiversity loss, and food security. We need the data. And third, we need to stop weaponizing nature and natural resources. So it is absolutely ridiculous. Ever since the Greeks poisoned that river, we have been weaponizing natural resources and nature, and now we're thinking of weaponizing space. And we're thinking of space as a place to actually extend human conflict. This is absolutely ridiculous. We need to stop weaponizing nature and natural resources. So these are the 3 steps actually we need to perform, and all of them have to happen here on the planet before we can move on. We can actually move on towards outer space. Now, how do we do it? We need to close the gap between human and nature. I contributed as part of a group to create decentralized environmental verification, DEV methodology. Decentralized environmental verification means opening data up about the solutions, about what exactly we are doing to tackle climate change, biodiversity loss, and food security. How, who, when, where. How these solutions are actually happening. And then opening that data up so that anyone and everyone can actually have access to that information. For example, in carbon offsets, a company wants to compensate for their carbon footprint, for the impact they have on the planet, the emissions, the CO2 emissions they actually release into the atmosphere. Okay, but currently, when you purchase a certificate, a carbon offset, you get a medal, you get a certificate. You do not get access to all of the data. And what is more important, the rest of the humans don't get access to all of the data. So you're saying you're solving a problem, you're contributing towards the solution of a problem, you're bridging the gap between humanity and reaching sustainability goals, but no one sees the data. So that's the problem. Decentralized environmental verification allows for everyone and anyone to access anytime from anywhere the data. Is this forest really being protected? Is this lake, coastline, mangrove, desert, jungle actually being restored or no? Where is the data? Where are the satellite images, the drone videos, the photographs, the sensor readings from the ground so you can actually get to know what is going on there? Can we see the animals? Can we see the control panels and the dashboards and the info being input in real time? Can we open that and share that on social media or not? Or can we just see the cover and the pretty medal that means it's certified? Someone certified it, that's it. That's the effort, we don't need to do anything more. The problem, what is actually happening at this moment with the current model of carbon offsets is that emissions are not going down. Emissions are going up. How come, if companies are compensating for their carbon footprint at the moment, emissions are going up? Who is lying? We need to show the data. We need to open the data so we can get to know and we can do the math and identify what is the missing part of information, who is not doing what they're supposed to do. But the problem gets absolutely bigger and more frightening when we're talking about biodiversity loss. biodiversity loss is actually a bigger problem for human survival in the short run. We are losing animal, plant, and fungi species every year at a rate that the problem is we don't even know what is. So we don't even know exactly how many species we're losing every year. We have not mapped them. We don't have enough data. We don't have enough information about biodiversity and biodiversity loss. And we are trying to solve it. This is supposed to be the United Nations decade of biodiversity. I would love to know where the data is. I would love that any one of us could actually share on our social media information about what is done right now by companies, by governments, by everyone about solving biodiversity loss. And as we enter to the third one, to food security, I mean, we have seen the news. The planet is going towards an unimaginable future in terms of food security. Because of problems we have caused, because of problems we have exacerbated actually, but the main subjacent problem there is that we again don't have quite enough data to know what the solutions should be, where we should be deploying them, and how exactly should we scale up after that. So we need to close the space, the gap, create a bridge between human and nature before we can conquer that outer space. And decentralized environmental verification allowed for the creation of the legacy offset, which is a combination of solutions and data for carbon, that is climate change, biodiversity, and food security at the same time. So it's a food security, carbon, and biodiversity offset that works on open data. And that bridges the gap. But how exactly did we get there? How exactly did we get to know that the problem, the big problem, is that we need this amount of data and this information so we can actually process it afterwards? The story goes like this. First, I wanted to create a natural reserve because I realized that we needed to protect many more square meters if we wanted to have a chance to survive. And that as many people as possible, as many institutions as possible, needed to actually take into account the space out there, the land out there, and start protecting whatever everyone could be able to protect, in addition to what is protected by the governments, by the global institutions. So we needed to protect space, land, ecosystems out there around the world. I started to do that, but soon, very soon, I realized that it was not enough. It would never be enough for companies, governments, individuals to start purchasing land and try to really protect it and enhance solutions for biodiversity, for food security, and for climate on areas if we didn't gather data. If we couldn't be having the opportunity to show the world how that ecosystem actually improved, what worked, what didn't work. So that is the problem. Biodiversity right now is invisible to us. Why is it invisible? Because we don't have data. We cannot see it if we don't have data. A space is invisible to us if we don't have the data to actually know and prove what is happening there. So it was not only about conquering land and ecosystems and space out there and trying to protect it, but we required data. We needed to actually start collecting data that then we could analyze and we could open, and that's how Victoria was born. Victoria Ecosystems actually is built on this notion that at the same time solutions and data can bridge the gap and close the space between human and nature. And come on, we will need data models in order for us to actually have a clue and project what humanity's life outside the planet will one day be. We will be willing to replicate ecosystems wherever we can, in domes, underground, anywhere. There are so many questions about what will be our life outside the planet at some point. But how on earth can we plan for that if we don't even understand how our own planet works? And it means if we don't have enough data about that. And at the end of the day, we now see, and this is a very, very blind, very mediocre perspective, we now see the planet as a space where there is life. But we don't recognize the planet as an enabler of life, as a space that enables life. And that is a fundamental question, because there is a huge difference between a room in which something happens and a room that enables something. And that is one of the big gaps we also need to take into account, because we are considering this place a room where things happen, where we can move things, where we can put tables, where we can put screens, where we can do anything we want, and then we can replace it. But not as this room that enables life. And if we are going to move on to other spaces, come on, we really need to understand how it is that this planet can actually enable life. We need to close the gap, this space, conquer actually the space between human and nature before we can actually move on towards the greater space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christopher, for these remarks. So we have a few minutes for trying to generate a discussion, or if you have any questions or comments. So the floor is open, as we say.
Thank you for the interesting topics that you were talking about. I don't know if it's a statement or a question. So you were talking about the AI and the future of it. What I believe in AI, it is a double-edged sword. So basically, AI is an amazing tool that can be used for healthcare. Mathematicians use it to calculate things and stuff. But what I see right now is the monopolization of the technology. AI is an amazing tool to help with the climate change, the food shortages. But the problem is monopoly. What I see that, let's say for the recent example, Elon Musk paying Twitter for, I don't know, like $8 billion. I don't remember the exact number. That could help feed a lot of people. So morally, I want to see, why didn't anyone talk to him or judge him or discuss it with him, that this can solve a big problem with us, to the world, to the climate change? No, he spent it all on, I don't know, controlling information, controlling technology, controlling the space invasion, let's say. He tried to travel in space for like a short minutes. A lot of people paying millions for it, leaving a carbon emission that is scary in numbers. And still no one is judging him. No one is trying to counter him. Everyone is clapping for him because he traveled in space for a few minutes. If we can use this money, if we can use a lot of his potential to help humanity, it would be a great thing. My question is, us as average humans, let's talk about me, an average person. How can I make them accountable for these things? I don't have the power. I am convinced about all what you said. I am convinced. But how can I, the average person, help with all of this problem if I don't have their power? Thank you.
So I think that's a wonderful question. Maybe all three might want to respond in kind.
Thank you for that question. It's fantastic, really. And I think it goes to one of my biggest beliefs is that we often think that we are really small in a big place, and that power really only comes to certain places, that there isn't much we can do. But I think that there's so much impact that one person can create with what you have. You start there. Education is a big tool for that, and I think it's a growing conversation, and I think that's one of the most important roles that technology has when we think about our young generation and children and how we are actually preparing them for their future, so that people can actually make choices that are relevant, like you're saying, that scenario. We in this room, we can make choices about that we can't potentially change people's actions or what they do with a certain power or where they take that, but we can make choices about the tools we use, the places where we spend our time, where we read, where we spend our time on social media, the information we share and what we read. These are choices that we can make on a daily basis. And beyond that, I always say, you want to make a difference, there's 17 opportunities there. I was talking about the 17 sustainable goals, right? I think all of us, you incline for potentially 1 or 2 or 3 goals there that, it's where your attention is. And I think that that's a calling, and that is a place to start where you are. But there's probably more conversations around the Twitter, Elon Musk, around democracy as well, and because one of the reasons that he was using to justify some of his actions was to protect democracy. So I think that's probably something that you can say about that given your presentation.
I don't know. I don't know. I would say that we have to put attention to the fact that the technology generates psychic effects on us, and we are not conscious about that. For example, when we use the cell phone, I say that because of the education. The education in traditional modern way is a conscious process. It's not a subliminal process. You have to take a problem, discuss about that, and let it go to the conscious. But when you use technology, we don't do that. For example, how do we use the cell phone? Having it with us all the time. We can use it from everywhere. And for example, the screen of the telephone is quite personal, in opposition to the screen of TV. And we know that, but we don't think about that. That is, my telephone, that is the screen of this restaurant or the screen in the living room of my house. And these technological differences have an effect upon our behavior to others, upon the behavior to us, and we are not conscious about that. So the problem of education is not in this way. The traditional education is through imitation, through giving models, not so much in saying do that, and don't do that, but showing how one has to be. And the problem is which society is prepared to do that. The West is not prepared to do that, because in the West everything has to be discussed and put in a series of arguments and of conclusions. Is no imitation. And what happens through the theater of consciousness had not the force of tradition, the force of habit. And the technology had this kind of force. In this sense, I will say that the artificial intelligence had at least two kinds. The kind of artificial intelligence that works in the environment. This kind of artificial intelligence had no room for subjectivity, for individuality, for what I want. For example, so far I know, in Singapore there is a control of the streets, and I have no say about that. You can go to this street and nobody asks you. The artificial intelligence says there are only so many places for autos at this road at that time. And there is no discussion about that. The public environment of artificial intelligence has do not care for the individual. And there are other things like the Internet of Things in my home, where I can personalize everything, only for me. It is very different, the private use of artificial intelligence and the public or corporate use of artificial intelligence. All that happens without our conscience. There is some technology that trains us to be as a group, to be in the horde, and there is other kind of technology that trains us in order to be subjectivistic, to be hedonistic, to try to be whatever I want, even to decide that I am a woman, for example. And that is my business. No? And now I am a woman, or I am bisexual, or I can be whatever I want. And so these tendencies are there, and the task is to address these possibilities. And the sad side of the situation is that we can do that as easily by through discussion. The effects of technology are subliminal. Technology is like a prison on the walls. When we agree, when we use some gadget, we are under the condition of the gadget. Whenever, if we want other, we want not. My cell phone has to be with me all the time. Otherwise, it doesn't function.
Okay, so on what can you do? I would say, I mean, in face of the world problems, I could really say two things. First, get informed, because we do need to know what those problems are. And then, own your visceral reaction to those world problems. Why? Because if you only go through the motion, if I tell you, what are you going to do to stop biodiversity loss? What are you going to do to stop climate change? I mean, your brain tries to answer, but it can't. Your stomach is what answers, is what goes like this, like to the front, and then it stops because it says, what? No, there's nothing I can think of. That is the visceral reaction to a world problem. You have to own it. You have one. You're entitled to one. But what I said at the beginning, but know what you are studying. I mean, you have to get the data so you can then direct that visceral reaction, that emotional reaction to world's problems precisely, and you can channel it towards solutions. So we need both. we need to get informed about those world problems, and we need to own our emotional reaction to them. And only then we can actually contribute in a meaningful way, in a constructive way, to each and every one of those world problems that appeal to us, that talk to us, that call us the most.
So with those words, maybe I'll bring the session to a close, and please join me in thanking Kelly, Alberto, and Christopher for this very stimulating panel of presentations, and hopefully the discussion will not end. Thank you.
Thank you.